Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Mirror Dungeon solo video. Today we'll be joining the IRS by using T Corp Rodion. Now she is a pretty interesting identity, being a Tremor identity as well as a Bind character. Now in my opinion, Bind is one of the worst status effects in the game. When used against you, it can be very impactful as your speed does matter quite a bit, but when we can actually use it, it doesn't really do a whole lot. Bind's value is entirely dependent on the enemy's natural speed range, and most of the time they naturally roll significantly lower than us. Of course, there are always going to be certain enemies and characters who are much faster, and in those specific circumstances it will be much more valuable, but generally speaking, Bind will always be inferior to Haste. For Rodya specifically, she does benefit quite a bit from Bind, as she does more damage against enemies who have it. When it comes to her Tremor, outside of her skill 3, it's not the greatest. She inflicts a total of 2 Tremor potency and 4 Tremor count if she wins clashes, and while it's not the worst, the clash win requirement does make it slightly less reliable. Her skill 3 though is a lot better, with it inflicting 3 Tremor count and potency as well as Tremor bursting with no requirements whatsoever. All that aside though, the main reason you'd use her is not for the Bind, nor is it for her Tremor. The reason you'd use her is for her unique status effect, Time Moratorium. Only her and T Corp Don Quixote possess this effect, so in order to use it, you have to use one of them to access it. As for which one is better, it honestly depends. Don's numbers are just flat out better, being a 3-star instead of a 2, but when it comes to Tremor infliction, Rodya does have her beat. The main difference between the two of them comes down to how they inflict Time Moratorium. The only real difference is that Don Quixote needs the enemy to have at least 10 Tremor to inflict it, and Rodya doesn't. However, Rodion does need to be in the Borrowed Time state, which requires her to use her defense skill. Borrowed Time is a very simple status effect, which outside of allowing Time Moratorium to activate, gives haste, fragile, and clash power equal to its level. I'd probably say that if you're trying to do Time Moratorium shenanigans, Rodya is probably the better option, unless you're in the Mirror Dungeon, in which case it doesn't really matter. Starting the run off, we take Reverberation and Sour Liquor Aroma for our starting gifts and pick the Outcast for the first floor. For the boss, we're up against the Doomsday Calendar, who is at the very least the hardest of the 3 potential bosses. Despite that though, he's still pretty easy, especially considering that he's incredibly weak to all of our attacks. In fact, he's so weak to us, we can avoid triggering any of his skill checks altogether and completely ignore the dolls entirely while focusing everything into the calendar. We take the Oscillating Bracelet for our reward and receive Lowest Star as a bonus before heading into Lake World for the next floor. Here we buy Imposed Weight, Lithograph, and an extra skill 3 before making it to the boss against the Twin Hook Pirates. With most of them being fatal to blunt damage and Lithograph healing back any damage we might take, this fight is pretty simple. Not even Bleed can pose much of a threat, as we can easily heal back any damage it does. On top of this, Time Moratorium helps quite a bit in order to stall the fight and gain more skill slots. We don't necessarily need many skill slots, but more damage is always useful.
탄력이 잘 드네요. 아마 그 공격이 약점이었겠죠? 직원들이 개트를 제압. 얼마 안 걸릴 거야. 수비랄 능력도 의지가 없다. 직원들이 개트를 제압하는데 얼마 안 걸릴 거야. 남은 시간
너무 세게 맞은 건 아니?
남은 시간 힘들게 떡콩 한 방 먹였어. 어떤 공격적인 얼마 안 걸릴 거야. 괜찮은 공격이네요. 앞으로도 그렇게만 해주세요. 방금 어떻게 하신 거죠? 깜짝 놀랐어요. 얼마 안 걸릴 거야. 남은 시간을 탈탈 풀어주는 수밖에. 원더풀 선택이었어 나리! 어디 보이세요? 조금만 더 힘을 잡지 않았어. 얼마 안 걸릴 거야. 남은 시간을 탈탈 풀어주는 수밖에.
We take Downpour for our reward and head into Emotional Repression for the next floor. Here we fuse Clockwork Spring before making it to the boss against the Talisman doll. The doll's main gimmick revolves around applying 2 attack power down when you have 10 Talisman, but with opposed weight counteracting this and Rodia's immense clash power thanks to all of her conditionals, it's not really that much of an issue. The biggest problem is the rupture that the doll inflicts, as if we get more than a little unlucky, it could easily end up staggering us. Fortunately, Rodia is just tanky enough for us to avoid stagger, and with the doll having very little skills in the first place, surviving this long is enough to ensure we never take any more damage again.
괜찮은 공격이네요. 앞으로도 그렇게만 해주세요. 요즘 얼마 안 걸릴 거야.
깨달음을 얻으셨군.
모자를 쓰고 있는
좋다, 좋아. 계속 집중하지.
정답이에요. 가령 시간만 충분하면 얼마 안 걸릴 거야. 지불할 능력도 의사도 없다면 방금 공격 다른 게 채우기도 다시 해봐줄래? 영상으로 남기면 얼마 안 걸릴 거야. 남은 시간이 공이 하나가 끊어졌네요. 이제 좀 수월해지겠어요.
We take Melted Spring for our reward and head into Time-Killing Time for the next floor. Here we buy Painkillers, Eclipse of Scarlet Moths, and Warning Notice before fusing Biovenom Vial and heading into the boss against the Time Ripper. This was definitely a pretty difficult fight, not because of the Time Ripper, but because of his little mini drones. Being fatal to both Pierce and Envy damage meant that unless they were either using their single coin skill or defense skill, we would be taking a lot of damage. Not enough to stagger, but enough so that the bleed they also inflict would put us below the threshold. Now, Rodia does have one unique aspect that gives her a bit of an edge in terms of survivability, and that is her passive Golden Time. If she ends a turn between 16 and 20% health, she will instantly heal 60% of her health and recover from stagger. The problem with this is that it's completely unreliable. When you do end up getting staggered, most of the time you either don't reach this threshold or blow right past it and die. Even without this though, the Time Ripper still hard counters it. If you want to try and trigger it on purpose, you have to let his big attack go through, which is not only a pierce skill, but also inflicts a ton of bleed. Enough bleed to completely negate all of the healing from the passive. I really tried my best not to, but unfortunately I had to use Hex Nail for the healing in order to survive the onslaught of fatal attacks. As soon as the Time Ripper enters his second phase, we have the upper hand, or at least we are on even ground. He borrows some time, but so do we, allowing us to match his clash power and take back all of the time that he stole.
전략의 승리야. 계속 밀어주자.
상담에서 알려준 대로 잘했어. 상담 프로그램을 비우는데 얼마 안 걸릴 거야. 승객이 따끔 한번 먹였어.
We take Employee card for our reward and head into Murder on the Warp Express for the final floor. Here we buy Nixie Divergence and another skill 3, while also fusing Bell of Truth before making it to the final boss against Cassetti.
제가 도움이 될지는 모르겠어.
Cassetti is really not that difficult of a fight. In fact, I'd go as far to say that he's probably one of the easiest fights in the run. The reason why is because T Corp literally hard counters him. His whole main gimmick revolves around the astronomical amount of healing he can achieve by simply hitting you. When he reaches around 70% health, he will immediately heal back to full unless you have an evade or alternatively have Time Moratorium. Time Moratorium does nothing different to Cassetti than it normally does, but when it's active he cannot take any damage. And when he's not taking any damage, there's nothing for him to heal. You can completely bypass his 70% health trigger and stagger him with the instant nuke damage that Time Moratorium does. Of course he is resistant to sloth damage, but it's not enough to prevent this from happening. In fact, did you know that it's actually possible to kill Cassetti? Normally when you win against him, he just sort of stands there and gives up, but he does have a corpse sprite, and it is possible to kill him. Now I'm not entirely sure if it's tied to some sort of overkill threshold, or if it's some special mechanic to do with Time Moratorium, but it is the only way that I've ever actually seen it. If it is some special interaction with Time Moratorium, this does mean that canonically the only identities who are more powerful than Cassetti are T Dawn and T Rodya.
공격이 약점이었겠지? 얼마 안 걸릴 거야. 차! 동료들이여! 얼마 안 걸릴 거야. 오, 이렇게 성과를 내는 건 얼마만인지 몰라. 이제야 주목을 좀 받으려나?
And that's how I soloed Mirror Dungeon 4 hard using only T Rodion. She's definitely very powerful, especially for a 2-star. Borrowed Time and all of her conditionals easily allow her to clash as well as the 3-star, and honestly it's difficult to say whether she's better than Dawn or not. They both have their unique quirks, so I suppose it's more of a personal preference at the end of the day. Anyway, that's it from me. Like and subscribe to not miss next time where we'll be using this character. Goodbye!